Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Kevin Dolan, writer and author of Little Fag, A Journey of Self-Acceptance and Healing. And today I'm going to read chapter 4 from my book. It begins on page 28. The title of the chapter is, What If Christmas Didn't Come This Year? We were a welfare family. Although it was never explained to us why we were in welfare, it perhaps was because Dad was plagued with heart ailments beginning in his late 40s and therefore could not be employed on a steady basis. Mom was raising 5 kids, the 5 youngest Dolans because the older Dolans had left the nest, and in her words, was constantly robbing Peter to pay Paul. Welfare provided Mom with the financial security to support her brood. There was always a creeping fear that Christmas might not arrive. We had little money. When there was money, it was routinely spent by Dad on booze or funneled off in some other direction. Letters to Santa were never written. Yet somehow, Christmas came to our home every year because of Mom. I remember being aware something was wrong. Mom seemed gloomy. There seemed to be no conversation about the holiday. I thought there would be no Christmas, perhaps no presents, and maybe no Christmas-themed food. On the night of December 23rd, my siblings and I were playing in the snowbanks beside our house. It was bitterly cold. I could taste and smell my breath, which was frozen into my woolen scarf. There was a stillness, a slowness in time. We glanced up to see several fire engines turning the corner and heading down our street. They drove slowly, the sound of snow crunching under their tires. There were no sirens, no flashing lights. We all stopped to watch, quietly. Our childhood had taught us not to react excitedly to anything at all, not when disappointment was so prevalent. Our childhood had taught us to be guarded, expressionless, without expectation. The fire engines came to a halt in front of our house. Mom called us all inside. Big uniformed men carried boxes into the house, boxes and boxes. I caught a glimpse of a huge frozen turkey, mandarin oranges in small balsa wood crates, presents tagged boy age 7, girl age 9, and so on. Boxes and boxes. 5 young children didn't react as Christmas was paraded before us. We were silent. Mom, too, was silent, standing apart in the corner of the living room, her hands held in prayer over her mouth. The parade of boxes stopped. A firefighter walked over to Mom and whispered something in her ear. She held him tightly, and then they all walked out of the house. I never learned why the firemen came that day or what they said to my mom. The gift still has me counting down sleeps to Christmas. What I braved. Close your eyes for a second and imagine yourself as a 9-year-old in the days before Christmas. Now see if you can think of Christmas not coming. Try to imagine how that feels. With all the worldly evidence of the Yuletide season swirling around us, including icicles in excess of a foot long that draped from the house, we as little kids never assumed Christmas would show up. Mom never sat us down and explained all her challenges when this season rolled along. Silence is what signaled the arrival of Christmas. I think of Mom as the mitigator of Christmas. Her role was to make Christmas, if it was bad, less severe, serious, or painful. She would lessen the severity of its non-arrival so that her children were less disappointed. I always sensed she missed her calling as a lawyer. What saddened me most was this was never done ahead of the holiday. And words were never spoken of the disaster looming or the celebration coming. It either happened or it didn't. Don't get me wrong. Many Christmases did arrive, and for that, I'm immensely grateful. I learned to have no expectations, and when I reflect back to what we did as kids and what we had to endure, that feels almost inhumane. We didn't watch out. We didn't care if we cried or pouted. Our little hearts learned quickly how to shelter from hurt. What I braved the most was the searing pain of having to pretend there was nothing going on. The abnormal became normal. The unlearning. Celebration was challenging growing up. Little did I know the impact of this wait-and-see mindset relative to Santa. I can see how I avoided any semblance of preparing for celebration, looking forward to it, or participating in it. My tiny universe had no room for it. For me, as an adult child of an alcoholic, I tend to underestimate the effects of being raised in an alcoholic family. Call it wishful thinking, I call it denial. There was no way I could understand addiction as a child, so I blame myself. How often did the adults tell me the lie that everything's fine? Being surrounded by emotionally checked out adults had a huge impact on my childhood. I can see how they taught me to also be checked out. It certainly felt safer. The unpredictability, the abuse, being in an environment of violence had me unsure of the household mood when I arrived home from school. Tension, fear, and conflict were always through the roof. And of course, none of it was overt. Yet I always knew an avalanche was imminent. Prior to meeting and marrying my amazing husband, my former partners had no idea why I was such a control freak. I lived life growing up, and my life growing up was always out of control and unpredictable. It's why I had a need to attempt to control everyone and everything. I struggled as a control freak to articulate what it was I was feeling. I didn't know how to express my feelings, all the while subconsciously remembering how unsafe it was to speak up in my family. I could never ask if Christmas was coming. The unlearning for me came as I began to learn how to stop struggling. As an adult child of an alcoholic, I struggled in so many ways. When I was being rigid and inflexible, or having difficult trusting and being closed off, life was tough. When shame and loneliness ruled the roost, it was a recipe for heightened struggle. Self-criticism, albeit entrenched more in self-hatred, along with its bedfellow perfectionism, caused substantial suffering and struggle. People-pleasing might not sound all that bad. After all, what's wrong with being nice to people and trying to help them out or make them happy? But people-pleasing generally went beyond simple kindness. It involved editing or altering words and behaviors for the sake of another person's feelings or reactions. I disappeared. Long before I realized being highly sensitive was one of my superpowers, I attempted to cover it up. Another recipe for struggle. Being overtly and overly responsible allowed me more of my energy to go into people-pleasing. There was another way to suppress and repress myself so that others were a priority over me. It also helped, so I thought, to minimize or eliminate conflict. Although the anxiety I experienced all the time was a normal reaction to stress, for me, it really lived as fear. It was my alert to dangers, and no one ever encouraged me to say that I was afraid. That was a huge struggle for me, to say that I was afraid. The most profound leaps of healing have occurred by recognizing I am not alone. Big breath, big breath. When I think of what this chapter walks you through as the listener, I'm reminded of all the ways that silence permeated every aspect of my life. I remember how challenging it was to get any sense of who I thought I could give myself permission to be, which essentially was anything but authentic. So life lived from a reactive perspective. There were a few times that I could respond to life. There was not a lot of joy to respond to. I didn't want to respond to the violence. And I realized that I reacted as best I could to the circumstances that were overtly wacky in the Dolan household. But here's what I did learn. I learned, and I made reference to people pleaser, but I also made reference to this notion of thinking I had it all figured out. You're the know-it-all. you're holier than thou. Those shadow parts of me, those parts of me that existed in response to needing to survive, I would carry them into my adult life without realizing that I was actually putting more energy into them. And of course, within the context of Jungian psychology, a shadow aspect of ourselves is a part of us we want to hide from the world. We don't want people to figure out we are that. So I would use these shadow parts of me, the part of me that would pretend I had it all figured out, Mr. Know-it-all, Mr. Holier than thou. Those parts of me sprung forward because I didn't want people to see that I didn't think that I was holy, that I didn't think that I was enough. I used Mr. Know-it-all as a way for people not to see how stupid I thought I was. So these dark aspects of me would follow me from childhood because they were strategies that were brilliant by the little boy aspect in me for surviving, for being able to react to the environment I was in. But they weren't doing me a lot of good as an adult. And ultimately, I'd bump into folks that would challenge me, that would call me out. Who do you think you are? A know-it-all? And of course, that was the first time I'd hear and think that that part of me actually probably wasn't all that brilliant as a way to cope with life. So what I've been able to do is to integrate those parts of me. They still exist. And now, from time to time, when I feel I want to pretend to be the know-it-all, or the person that thinks he's holier than thou, the snobby part of me, I can take a breath and realize that I'm probably present to some part of me that has an opportunity to authentically express. So I've been able to learn how to ask people from time to time when I think I don't know how something works, or I can't figure it out. So instead of the dark talk to me being, you're stupid, I can say to somebody, I don't really know how this works. Can you help me figure this out? Here is this part of me that thinks he's stupid, now asking somebody who perhaps is a little bit more wise than me to actually help me figure something out. So wouldn't it be brilliant that the stupid part of me, and I've learned to love that little guy, then could find somebody to actually help him learn something? I mean, that's not stupid. That's actually really brilliant. So what I'm really pleased about is having learned from those early experiences that I don't need to use those parts of me that aren't my true expression. And from time to time, when they do eke out, I can own them, find some love for them, and nuzzle up to somebody like my brilliant husband who can help me figure something out when I'm thinking I may not be able to do it myself. So I think it's actually brilliant work, and it's love-filled work, and it's inspiring for me.